So welcome everyone to our panel discussion on this International Holocaust Remembrance Day and the 78th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. As a part of the English Montreal School Board's Holocaust Education Program, we are proud to have you all here this afternoon watching all across Montreal. From 1941 to 1945, Nazi Germany and its collaborators committed the systematic murder of over 6 million Jews. The Holocaust, also known as the Shoah, was Nazi Germany's final solution for eliminating all Jewish people within Nazi Germany's grasp. By the end of this heinous act, roughly 2/3 of Europe's Jewish population had been murdered. My name is Mark Bergman. I'm the proud grandchild of Romanian Holocaust survivor, the late Baruch Cohen, and co-host of the EMSB's Holocaust Education Program, along with Eliane Goldstein, who you see on the screen right near me.
I'm Eliane Goldstein. I'm also the descendant of survivors, and not only that, the Holocaust is very close to me because I have a podcast called The Effect on Us, about where survivors come on and give their firsthand experiences. I started The Effect on Us in order to bring more education and to spread awareness about the Holocaust, and that's why I'm so excited to be able to join you guys today. Holocaust victims were people targeted by the government of Nazi Germany based on their ethnicity, religion, political beliefs, or sexual orientation. While the vast majority of the Nazi regime's victims were mainly Jews, Romani, LGBTQ, and some Slavic people or political enemies were also targeted. So let's welcome our panelists. We have Fishel Goldig, a Holocaust survivor, joining us thanks to the Azrieli Foundation Holocaust Survivor Memoirs program.
We also have Michelle Sadowski, educator, Holocaust Survivor Memoirs program. Hi, Michelle.
Ita Yudin, the Vice President Quebec for the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs.
We have Heidi Berger with us, founder and president of the Foundation for Genocide Education. Hi, Heidi.
Rose Gottheil, Montreal Holocaust Museum.
And we'll be talking to our whole entire panel in a couple of minutes, as well as two students who are about to go on March of the Living. But let's start now with remarks by Mike Cohen of the EMSB. Mike?
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure. I feel very proud to be an employee of the English Montreal School Board today. I've been here 24 years, and prior to working here, I spent 10 years working at the Canadian Jewish Congress, where I traveled all over the world, working on issues to stamp out anti-Semitism, to educate people about the Holocaust. And this year, because of a grant from the Jewish Community Foundation, a Nova Grants program, we've been able to do a full-fledged Holocaust education program with our schools, visiting the museum, having guest speakers, having webinars like this. It's been a terrific program. And of course, having Mark, who's a well-known broadcaster in Montreal, known on the Beat 925, and Eliane, who's only in grade 9 at Westmount High School and has really stepped up to assist us. You must listen to their podcast. You can go to holocausteducationmtl.com. I thank the panelists, and I turn it back to you, Mark and Eliane.
We're going to turn things over to Eliane to introduce our two students that are going on the March of the Living from Royal West Academy. Eliane.
So the March of the Living is an annual educational program which brings Jewish students from around the world to Poland for a week, where they explore the remnants of the Holocaust, and then to Israel for another week, where they explore the rebuilding of the Jewish people following the Holocaust and celebrate their survival. Emmet Tabul and Brooke Shazanoff Moss, why do you think that it's so important to go on the March of the Living?
I think it's really important because it's very important for us to keep the story going and to share with others eventually when the survivors won't be around anymore. So to keep educating people about what happened so that it never happens again, and so that anti-Semitism can hopefully eventually be non-existent.
I think it's important to go on the March of the Living because it's one thing to hear all the stories and to hear 6 million Jews died, but it's another thing to go to the actual place that they were at and to really hear all the individual stories and hear the names of the people and I think it's important to like experience that as a Jew, to have that be like, because the Holocaust is kind of part of our heritage, and we should really be educated about the topic.
Yeah, that's very good. I'm very happy for you guys that you're able to go and you're able to learn more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brooke, can you let us know a little bit about the education that you've received pre-March of the Living, some of the prep sessions, and what you've learned so far about what you're about to experience?
Yeah, for sure. Well, at some of the prep sessions, there's survivors there, and they tell us about their stories, which is great because, like, you always read about it in books or you see it in movies, but like to hear it from an actual survivor is like completely different. It's way more lifelike, and like they actually went through it, so it's different than like actors. So that was really cool. We've only had 2 sessions, so we're not that deep into it yet, but I'm excited to see what else like we're gonna learn later on.
And we're looking forward to hearing all about your trip, and we'll have you on our podcast coming up when you guys are back in Montreal. So let's bring in a Holocaust survivor, Fishel Goldig. We'd like to talk to Fishel. Good afternoon, Fishel.
Hi. Looking
Thanks for
forward
being here.
to answer any of your questions.
As a Holocaust survivor, how important has it to share your story with students over the years? You've shared your story with so many students, and tell us why that's so important to you.
Well, we, the survivors, have an obligation. Our obligation is to tell our story to anyone who wants to hear it, in any language that you want to hear it. And so, because it's very, very, very important. You see, the students mentioned something which I like to say. The reason that we study and we as survivors go to all over the world to tell the story is because, to start with, it was the greatest tragedy that the humankind, the world has ever known. So it's very important to hear it and to do something about it, because the main thing we want to do as survivors is to make sure that you, the younger generation, will do something about it. Because, as was said, that we are not going to be around for very long. We're, of course, the last generation of survivors. And so it is also important because this Holocaust, up till recently, I didn't think so, but now I see that it can happen again. And therefore, we must be vigilant. And we must do whatever we can to prevent another Holocaust.
How do you think your life has been different as a survivor?
Say again, please.
How do you think your life has been different as a survivor?
My life has been much, much better as a survivor than it was when I was in ghetto and stuff. So I've been here in Montreal since 1948. I was 14 years old when I came, and I have succeeded. I have a lovely family of 4 kids and seven grandkids. And I have been very successful in my life so far, and I thank God for that. And it's been just fine. the only negative that I can say is I should have started to tell my story of survival. I've been doing this now for 8 years, and I should have done it 28 years ago. But we are where we are, and so I am not complaining about my life at this point. Okay?
Yeah. Let's talk to Michelle Sadowski now.
Hi.
Hi. So, we've been working with you via the Holocaust Survivor Memoirs program. What has been the response from students across the country to the books you published and the opportunity for them to meet and hear from the authors?
I would say the response from students is generally quite similar across the board. We have outreach programs that go all across the country to all of the provinces and territories. And without a doubt, every student walks away from the experience of both reading a firsthand account and especially the opportunity to meet with a survivor. They all look back at that opportunity as a way to humanize the history. And the number one piece of feedback that we get from students is that we read the textbooks and we hear about the statistics and we hear about the dates and the facts and the entire political, historical context. But when you actually sit down and read a story or speak to a person that lived through it, it takes it off the paper and makes it very real. And while that might be harder for lots of students, that also makes them connect on a whole other level. And so that's really at the core of what we try to do, is try to humanize history and bring forth those firsthand accounts into as many classrooms as possible.
Michelle, what does it tell you when we see that unbelievable stat yesterday that nearly half of Canadians don't know what Auschwitz was?
So there's a couple of things at play there. And I mean, we have amazing relationships with teachers across the country who are very committed to teaching about the Holocaust. And one of the challenges that we face is that it's not federally mandated. Our education curriculums are they're all provincially mandated. And so each curriculum in each province looks a little bit different. It comes into the classroom in different grades or at different points in different subjects. And so we can't really mandate this on a federal scale. And part of the challenge with that is that unless a teacher is really personally committed to teaching about the Holocaust, there's these few moments where it can come into the classroom and they're not consistent across the board. And so part of what we're doing is trying to reach more to administrators and people who are higher up in the school boards. And the English Montreal School Board is actually a great example in which we've done that, because we work really closely with the Director General. And so this is a top-down approach. That means that our resources are getting out there to all of the principals and all of the schools, as opposed to just waiting for one really passionate teacher in a school to come forward. And so the more we can do that, and the wider our resources can reach, the better, I suppose.
Do families at home have an obligation as well?
Absolutely. And I think that so much learning comes, of course, from the school that students attend, but absolutely from the home environment. That is where students and children learn the foundations of who they are as people. And so the conversations, the difficult conversations that are happening in the home can absolutely extend outwards. And I especially hope that when a student learns about it in their school environment, they take that information and conversation home with them to then have, further exploration on the topic with their parents, because sometimes parents need to be educated just as much as the students, I would say.
Sure. Okay, we're going to talk to Ita Yudin right now. And for those watching, if you have questions, please think of questions to ask. You'll be able to submit those after our panel is done, and we're going to be reading your questions and asking them to the panel. So let's bring in Ita Yudin. And Ita, I'd love for you to give us a little bit of an overlay on just how bad anti-Semitism currently in 2023 is, and what information would you like students to know about?
So first, let me just begin by commending all of you for putting this together, because part of the fight against anti-Semitism and racism is awareness and education. And I'm really happy to hear what Michelle was saying about context, and not just remembering that the Holocaust happened, but learning about the political context that led to the kind of hatred that really became rooted in society and became the most documented genocide in our history. There's this notion sometimes that anti-Semitism, sort of finished with the Holocaust, or that it's, only white supremacists who are anti-Semitic. And I think it's important to understand that, unfortunately, we've seen a global rise in anti-Semitism in the last couple of years, and we're not immune here in Quebec. Anti-Semitism, right now, Canada's Jewish community represents less than 1% of the population of Canada, and yet 14% of all hate crimes are directed at the Jewish community, and about 55% of hate crimes targeting religious groups target the Jewish community. So we're the second most targeted minority and the most targeted religious minority in Canada. Anti-Semitism evolves. It evolves with time and has a different way of manifesting of itself in different movements. We see it as much on the extreme left as we do on the extreme right. And, why I want to come back to what I said about how, this program and the things that you're doing with the Azrieli Foundation and the Holocaust Museum and education in-house is important, is because anti-Semitism, while it is targeting the Jewish community, it affects everyone. We know that anti-Semitism is like a canary in a mine shaft. It's an indication that something is wrong and it needs to be addressed. And unfortunately, we know all too well what begins with the Jews doesn't end with the Jews. And we need to recommit ourselves to the fight against anti-Semitism, and all the things that you guys are doing here, the student involvement in this program, the visits to museums, and the education is part of that commitment and part of that fight against anti-Semitism and all forms of racism.
So, how do you think the rise of anti-Semitism has affected Holocaust studies, and what changes would you like to see here in Quebec?
So actually, we're calling on the Quebec government to make Holocaust education mandatory. Right now, it's optional, and there's an optional curriculum that was developed in collaboration with the ministry. In Ontario, for example, just a couple of weeks ago, the Ontario government made Holocaust education mandatory. So along the lines of what Michelle and I think are very much on the same page, we're looking at making it mandatory across the country, because the stats that Mark, you referred to are really disturbing. I don't think you went over all the stats, but something like 22% of Canadian millennials have not even heard of the Holocaust, and 62% of Canadian millennials were not even aware that 6 million Jews were killed. So, education is important. The generation of Holocaust survivors, and we're so lucky to have them with us on this panel and in this program, and those of you who have the opportunity to meet with Holocaust survivors personally and hear their stories, is so important, because it's not just a number, and it's not just about what happened in history. It's about the lived experience. It's about learning what the warning signs are, and learning and recommitting ourselves to fight against it. It's standing up and saying these kinds of things will never be acceptable again.
Ita, over the years, have those stats been getting worse and worse, despite all the education and awareness that we've been giving?
Yeah, so we saw a shocking, dramatic rise in anti-Semitism first in 2020 through the pandemic, and then in 2021. So if you just take a snapshot from January 2020 to May 2020, you had more incidents more anti-Semitic incidents in Quebec than you had in all of 2019. And that stat continued to climb. In 2021, we saw some incidents in Montreal that I never thought I would see here in my lifetime in terms of anti-Semitism. And so, yeah, it's climbing. The importance of political leadership, influencers, those in positions of influence, standing up and calling it out, and standing against anti-Semitism is important. If you'll see, we actually have a couple of things going on today, which I think students should know about. About 52 monuments across Canada are going to be lit up tonight as part of the day as part of International Holocaust Commemoration Day, including in Montreal, the Olympic Stadium and the Champlain Bridge. And, you know, if anyone wants to join in, we have a campaign on social media. You take a picture, hashtag We Remember, and tag World Jewish Congress and at CJA Info, and you can be part of the awareness campaign about the Holocaust, about what happened, and the importance of fighting against racism.
Yeah, I think that it's so important to do stuff like this so that no one ever forgets the tragedy that happened. So let's now welcome Heidi Berger, who is the founder and president of the Foundation for Genocide Education.
Hi.
Heidi, we are witnessing the horror of the war in Ukraine. Is this an act of genocide on the part of the Russians?
Well, let's look at it. So since Russia invaded the Ukraine on the 24th of February, 2022, there's well-documented instances of targeted bombings of civilians, deportations, relocation of children, committed sexual violence, and intentional destruction of cultural and national monuments, as well as mass graves and burial sites. So experts are still determining if the war crimes committed by Russia constitute an intent to commit genocide. And regardless of this decision, whenever they make this decision, the world must expose the human rights violations committed by Russia and bring the perpetrators to justice. Now, most important in this picture, since we're dealing with teaching and students and teachers, is that teachers must be bringing this up in their classrooms. When teachers have to be prepared, teachers have to have the skills to learn how to teach genocide and the steps leading to genocide. And they can have, therefore, discussions about what's happening in today's genocide, including the Uyghurs and what we consider is the genocide in Ukraine. Now, for teachers to be prepared, they have to have the skills. And how do they have the skills? Most teachers in Quebec and in Canada are afraid to teach it, or they say they don't have the time. But right now, we have to compliment the province of Quebec because the Minister of Education funded a guide in collaboration with two researchers and writers from the University of Sherbrooke and Trois-Rivières and us and the Holocaust Museum. And they have this guide in their hands. It's right now in French, and it'll be in English in March, where they will have the tools with a video instruction, with testimonials, with workshops being held as we speak in the Holocaust Museum and outside of there as well, being funded by the government. They will have the tools to be able to teach the steps leading to genocide. And in understanding the steps leading to genocide, they will therefore be helping students understand what is racial intolerance and what is anti-Semitism. So we can talk about Ukraine and genocide, but we're talking now about what do we do about it? How do we teach it in the classrooms?
Heidi, can you tell us a little bit more about the work that you've done in schools over the last years?
Well, besides collaborating with the Minister of Education on this guide, which will be in English, by the way, in March, and we're going to welcome teachers in the English School Board to embrace this guide. We also send, including myself, children of survivors and survivors into schools. What our foundation does is we put together an interactive presentation with using their parents' testimonials. Because let's face it, a student can sit and watch a testimonial by a Holocaust survivors. And as our Holocaust survivors said before, they're getting older and we're slowly using them. I think he kindly said it was his obligation to tell a story. I think it's our obligation now to go into schools and tell our stories. So our foundation puts together presentations, and we send children of survivors into schools using their parents' stories. In an interactive presentation, we talk about why it's important they know about it. And then they tell their parents' stories using their testimonials, gathered either from the Holocaust Museum or the Shoah Foundation. And then we end on their responsibility to not let this happen again. So we're doing that.
Heidi, thanks. Let's bring Rose in. And Rose, we know the EMSB has sent a lot of schools to visit the museums, visit the museum this year. For those who haven't had the experience of visiting the Montreal Holocaust Museum, can you please share with us a little bit about how these visits work at the museum?
Yes, so we have received many students from the EMSB, and many more are already booked for the winter and spring. So usually groups have the option of booking a tour of the exhibit and then can follow the tour with an educational workshop that focuses more specifically on a Holocaust survivor story, and they'll do an interactive activity with reproductions of artifacts from our collection. And we also do offer survivor testimonies following the visit. And the tour of the exhibit really explores the history of the Holocaust in chronological order. So we start before the Holocaust, looking at the diversity of Jewish life in Europe and North Africa. Then we move down to the next section that starts right after the First World War, looking at the rise of the Nazi Party and the policies of discrimination against Jewish people. In this part too, we look at the response of Canada during this time. This is usually a section that's really surprising for students, Canada's closed door immigration policy. And then we really look at the outbreak of the Second World War, what life was like for Jewish people in concentration camps and ghettos. We look also at spiritual and moral resistance during the Holocaust, and finally ending with liberation and the arrival of survivors in Montreal.
So what is the feedback you get, especially from non-Jewish students who are perhaps not familiar with the Holocaust?
Yeah, so I would say the section about spiritual resistance is always really impactful for students to see how Jewish people resisted by practicing their traditions, or stories of solidarity between people. So that's usually a reaction. Students are very moved by this part of the exhibit. And like I mentioned earlier, connecting to the history of antisemitism in our own province is also shocking. We have a sign saying Jews not wanted here. It's a sign that was in Saint Agathe. So, you know, students have country homes there, and they're usually surprised to see that antisemitism existed, and as the other panelists mentioned, exists today as well.
Rose, if there's teachers watching or schools watching that want to get in touch, how could they do so to book a tour?
Yes, they can give us a call by phone. We also on our website have a reservation form. It's under the Visit the Museum tab of our website, so they can fill out that form and we'll get in touch by email as well.
Okay, thanks. So as we said at the beginning of the presentation, you can send in your questions now via the chat, and we do already have some questions coming in from students, so don't be afraid to send them in. And our first one is for Fishel. One of the students is asking, how does it feel to hear about the rise of anti-Semitism currently now, again in 2023?
Well, that's a very, very interesting question. First of all, let me say that I was brought up in anti-Semitism. And the first thing that when I talk to students in classes and so on, or to other groups, I always tell them that I found out what anti-Semitism is when I was very, very young, 6 years old. But yes, the anti-Semitism that we had, for instance, in Canada. Let's talk about this. First of all, we had Semitism from both the federal and provincial government, there was some anti-Semitism. But when we got here, we were so happy to be here that, and we had so much of it in the past, and in Europe, wherever we were. Anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe was absolutely exceptionally bad, but we lived with it, and our history goes back 2,000 years with anti-Semitism, and we got over it. We survived. We prospered. So yes, there was some anti-Semitism, and there is some today. Thank God that it's not terrible as it has been in the United States, for instance, where people were killed. Here it's there. We know it's there. We feel it sometimes, and we must just fight it, just like I did all my life. We speak to them. We face them. We tell them that they're telling lies about us, that they're ignoramuses that don't understand or don't want to understand who we are and why we are and so on. And this is very, very important. As a matter of fact, Alian had my story, my total story of survival. And that is what we do. We talk about, of course, the Holocaust, but I make it part of my story. I bring in how we felt when we first came to Canada. It was just very little as opposed to what we had in the past, but it was still anti-Semitism to a great extent. So that's the question.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have another one for you. Student wants to know if it's difficult to talk about your experiences.
That for me?
Yeah.
Yes, it is difficult. At times, it's very difficult. Because when I start talking about certain things that we experienced in the ghetto, it's something that comes back. The scene comes back to me, just like as if I was living it out today. The other thing is, of course, that my wife tells me occasionally that I just screamed in my sleep. And of course, I wake up and I don't remember any of it. So, but yes, it's a very serious and very terrible.
We have a question that came in for Ita from a 13-year-old who says, "What do I do if I see an act of anti-Semitism in my school?"
That is a great question. I'm hoping that you won't, but if you do, you absolutely have to call it out. You should tell your teacher. If you're not comfortable telling your teacher, then someone like your principal or the school social worker. But absolutely, if you see something going on, even if you're just witnessing it, then you should absolutely call it out and get help in how to deal with it. I mean, this is just like bullying. We don't allow these situations to go unchecked. And one of the lessons we've we're talking about the victims and the survivors, but we also have to remember that during the Holocaust, there were those who gave up everything, who sacrificed their lives, the righteous among the nations, and saved thousands and thousands of Jews who didn't add to that number of 6 million. And so standing up and saying something is a huge part of the fight against anti-Semitism.
And what if it's not at school, Ita? What if they don't have the surroundings of the school? Who can they go to, and where can they report acts of anti-Semitism?
So if it's really, really serious, I mean, you should be telling your parents. If there's something serious enough, you call 911. But if it's a situation that doesn't require police assistance or intervention, people should still be filing reports when they're victims of hate incidents with the police and letting them know something like this happened. But you should work with your parents to deal with the situation. You can reach out to CJA. Federation CJA has a community security network, and you can reach out and get security advice from the Director of Community Security. But you absolutely, need to figure out with your parents how to deal with the situation.
Thanks, Ita.
So we have a question coming in for Rose, who works at the Holocaust Museum. So this student wants to know, what display usually has the most effect on other people?
I think it would be the display of the heart from Auschwitz. So it's a little heart that can fit in the palm of your hand. And it's actually the only artifact that you can fully walk around. All the rest of our artifacts are in glass cases, so you can't walk around them. And this was a heart that was fabricated in Auschwitz by women, inmates, for the 20th birthday of their friend. And it's really a symbol of, it's actually on all of our posters and flyers. And it's really a symbol of, again, of resistance and solidarity, because to produce this little birthday card would have taken to get the materials and to put it together, these women were risking their lives to even make it. So it's really a symbol of friendship and resistance and solidarity.
Michelle, we have a question from I guess a parent who wants to know how to start educating their kids about the Holocaust, and when is the appropriate age to educate our kids about the Holocaust?
That's a great question. It's actually a question I get all the time. So we follow what we consider to be the best practices in Holocaust education. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or IRA, has a wonderful set of recommendations for teaching and learning about the Holocaust that really help both educators and parents stay within the guidelines, which are considered to be best practices. And part of that is the consideration of age in which we start. The Azrieli Foundation and the Memoirs program, we really recommend not really talking about it in an explicit way before grade 5 or around the age of 10 or 11. Only because, you can't really talk about the Holocaust without including some quite mature content, and it's hard to avoid it if you're going to do it justice. So that being said, the students really need to be at an age where they are able to hear the honest information without sugarcoating and, in a truthful and respectful way, without the bells and whistles, just the information as is. So I would say grade 5 is sort of the age in which real conversations can start around it. And there's obviously some different scenarios in which, if there's a familial connection, obviously the conversation might start sooner because a grandparent or a great grandparent might start sharing their story, and that's a different situation. So that's sort of one piece of it. And then the other piece is that, there are age-appropriate materials that are okay to bring in at a younger age. The books that we would recommend for a class of grade 5 students are different than the books that we would recommend for a group of grade 12 students or students in CJEP or students of a higher age level. So at the foundation, we categorize our books by age group, and stories that focus on survival around hidden children, people who were hiding in convents, or people who were hiding like Fishel was. We promote those stories as great first stories to look at for the younger age group. And then as the stories and as the students get older, we can start to bring in more information and start to give them a bigger sense of the picture. And if your child is associated with any educational institution, which if they're going to school, that means that they are, then our books are all free of charge to students and educators across the country, and free shipping, free everything. You just have to put in an order on our website, and everything is also available in English and French. So you can also just you can send me an email, or you can just reach out on the website, and I'm happy to get books to any students that are interested in learning more.
So we have a question for Heidi from a teacher. So they want to know how to start spreading awareness and teaching their students about what's going on in the Ukraine right now.
First of all, the teacher has to be very comfortable talking about it. And I would start talking about those steps that lead to genocide, and therefore them understanding that really what's happening in the Ukraine is a genocide. Because by identifying the steps leading to it, they'll understand what Russia is doing comprises very many of these steps. So slowly I would start that with images, etc. And therefore they're going to gain a much better understanding of what's happening in the Ukraine.
We have, I think, a last question here for Fishel. This is from a 12-year-old who wants to know what you were going through at the age of 12.
At the age of 12, I was in a DP camp. It's like a refugee camp in Western, in the Western American. I'm sorry. Let me say that again. The American part of Germany. I was in a camp. We had a great school. This was, of course, right after the war. I was there for 2 years, and I had my bar mitzvah, as a matter of fact, and in that camp. And it was not bar mitzvahs like you have here. It was very simple. But if I may, I would like to just say something about the prior question of why to find out about talking about anti-Semitism. I am of the opinion that if you want to know what anti-Semitism is all about, you should also start with finding out who it is that you are as a Jew, and get a little bit of education of why they dislike us, why they kill us. Find out. There is lots of literature for children or for adults, and it's important to know why somebody dislikes you. So then that goes back 2,000 years that we've suffered like that. Okay, I think I answered the question.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Very well said.
Right. So I actually have Fishel's entire story where I interviewed him. I have his entire story on my podcast. So if you're interested in learning more about the Holocaust, you could listen to that. It's called The Effect on Us, and you can stream it on all platforms. Or you could read a book or watch a movie or a documentary. So we've put some great resources in the chat or on the screen, and I hope that everyone's able to use them.
Thank you for watching this afternoon. Thank you to all our schools, and thank you to our panelists. And again, students, if you're on social media, don't forget you can hashtag We Remember Today on International Holocaust Day. Thank you for watching this afternoon.
Thank you so much.